Hi, my name's Mary Cranmore, and I will be doing a presentation on behavior modification. This is for our stress management class, PC 4018. Professor Penny Schuckman is the instructor. I will be referencing the 8th edition of Brian Lee Seward's book, Managing Stress, Principles and Strategy for Health and Well-Being, primarily Chapter 10 on behavior modification. So, why should we change our behavior? Maybe you're experiencing poor health, such as anxiety. Maybe you're harming your body. You're smoking, you're drinking too much. Maybe you promised somebody that you love that you would change your negative behavior. Maybe it was New Year's Eve resolution, or maybe you just wanted to change how you view yourself. There are any numbers of reasons why one would want to change his or her behavior. This is the reason why the bookstores out there are lined with self-help books. But no matter what the books say, according to author Brian Luke Seward, they cannot instill the willpower or the desire to change. So our behavior is a component of our personality, and the majority of psychologists believe that our personalities are made up of three distinct factors. These include our values, our attitudes, and our behaviors. Seward states values are abstract, intangible concepts, importance, or meaning such as time, health, honesty, creativity that are symbolized by material possessions. He goes on to state that attitudes are belief about our values, often expressed as opinions. So when he's stating that our values are intangible and sometimes symbolized as material possession, maybe you value your car or your house, whereas your attitude, it's not a material possession, but it's your opinion, how you feel about somebody or something, how you feel about, I don't know, the new healthcare law or something like that. And then finally, Seward goes on to say that behaviors are actions. They can be either direct or indirect that are based on conscious and sometimes unconscious thoughts. It is almost impossible to change your behavior, your personality. However, you can change your behavior, and almost anybody can accomplish this. All you need is the desire to change. So most human behaviors rely on the three most common theories of behavior modification. Those three theories are the classical conditioning, operant conditioning, and modeling. Now, according to Seward, classical conditioning is a learned behavior to a stimulus with regard to involuntary function. Ivan Pavlov, back in the 1920s, developed this theory when he was working with dogs. What he found out that by conditioning his dogs to eat whenever they heard a bell ring, they eventually began to salivate whenever a bell would ring, whether there was food present or not. And so he theorized humans were much like these dogs, that we can be conditioned to stimuli if given enough time. One of the examples he gave in the book was if we eat every day at 12 noon, we automatically become hungry at 12 noon because we become conditioned to eat at noon. Then the next theory that Seward examined is the operant conditioning, and this is also a learned behavior that stems from voluntary function or something we make a conscious decision about. This theory was developed by B.F. Skinner, who worked from 1930s through the 1970s, and his basic concept is one of reward and punishment. And we see this many, many times in a classroom. Children will receive green days, yellow days, red days, and green days are their rewards, and obviously red days are their punishment. And then the final theory Seward discussed is modeling, and modeling is the ability to emulate or imitate our behaviors from observations of others we respect. This theory is different from operant conditioning in that no behaviors are rewarded or punished, but rather people learn by imitating or copying others. You can see this most pronounced in small children who emulate his or her parents. And sometimes you'll hear of role models or heroes or mentors. But remember, one thing, that bad behavior can also be emulated. And then Seward goes on to discuss the biopsychosocial influences, which means holistically looking at behaviors from a biological view, a psychological factor. Maybe does a person have a mental illness? And then finally, social factors. Is a person homeless? Are they unemployed? Are they married? Are they single? So Seward states that by holistically viewing these behaviors, psychologists found that this much better approach to the well-being of an individual. Because we're taking stress management, the rest of this presentation, I'm going to talk about one of the major behavior changes, and that is assertiveness skills. And according to Seward and other psychologists, they believe that assertiveness skills is paramount in developing and maintaining self-esteem, which obviously you need your self-esteem in order to be able to keep your stress down. So there's a behavior model, modification model, that Seward speaks of, and it's steps taken to change a negative behavior into a positive one. Denial is normally the initial stage of any change. The person may not even realize he or she has a negative behavior. There used to be a TV program where it showcased individuals getting interventions from family members from drugs or alcohol, and almost always these people never ever thought there was a problem. And then the second stage of this modeling is, this behavior modification model is awareness, and this is when the person finally becomes aware of a specific behavior. Example is somebody who's always negative, finally realizing his or her attitude is very negative. It's almost like they had an epiphany or something. And then finally, the third stage is a person has a desire to change. Using the example above, or the example I used about the negative person, they may actually run into problems at work because of their negative behavior. Maybe their boss will tell them, sorry, if your attitude doesn't change, you're going to lose your job. Many times you hear people talking about they have to hit rock bottom, and this is when you really have a real desire to change, because without changing, your life is just never going to improve. And then Seward goes on to discuss cognitive restriction stage, and this is when you actually catch yourself in the act of this undesirable behavior and think of new and suitable alternatives. So, for instance, the next step is behavior substitution. So, substituting a new positive behavior for a less desirable one. One example would be, let's say every time you felt yourself going negative at work, you decide to go for a walk. And so you change your negative behavior into one of positive, where you're walking. And then finally, the person goes into an evaluation, and this is the process of observing and analyzing the new adopted behavior to see if that new behavior is working. Like taking a step back and thinking about your new behavior. One of the things is that maybe you find out, my attitude's so bad, I'm not getting any work done because I'm up walking all the time. So maybe you need to find a different way to change a negative thoughts. But with anything and with any change, the chance of relapse is very high. However, that doesn't mean that the person has failed. When a relapse happens, it is good to uncover what triggers or stressors are setting off those negative behaviors, and then you just start all over. And when it comes to change, knowledge is your friend. Next, we're going to talk about the assertiveness, and Seward defines assertiveness as a term given to behavior that is neither passive nor aggressive, but proactively diplomatic. Assertiveness is between passive, which is influenced by intimidation and can often lead to feelings of resentment. The person feels victimized. A passive person often is taken advantage of. They shy away from conflict and often suffer from very high amounts of anxiety. And then on the other end of the spectrum is aggression, which uses intimidation and manipulation. The aggressive individual has no regard for other people's feelings, and many times those around him or her lose respect for that person. So, what are some of the assertiveness skills that Seward outlined? And there were 7. These are learning to say no, learning to use I statements, use eye contact, use an assertive body language, practice peaceful disagreements, and avoid manipulation. And then finally, respond rather than react. So, learning to say no, this was one of those times when you see the mothers or overworked individuals and they volunteer for everything and they need to learn to be more assertive and say no and not feel guilt about it. Learning to use the I statements, this learning to tell people how you actually feel. Say, I do not feel like doing this. I am tired tonight. I can't go to your party. Another one is very important is to use eye contact. An assertive person uses eye contact often. Um, when you use eye contact, you are truly listening to the person, and the person who's speaking to you really believes and knows that you are listening. And then you want to use assertive body language, and this is where you sit up tall or stand up tall. You're not slumping your shoulders, but you're just really feeling, you have assertiveness about you. You're just feeling very positive. Um, Practice peaceful disagreements. This is when you can agree to disagree. This happens a lot in relationships or even in work settings where you will never probably ever come to the same agreement, but you can agree to disagree and walk away. And then one of the things that really I wanted to delve into just a little bit deeper was the avoidance of manipulation. And this is, don't intimidate others. Don't let others change the subject when you're talking to them about something serious. Don't let them come up with something and just completely snowball you with a completely different topic. Never, ever, ever do personal assassinations or personal attacks on an individual. Stay with the facts when you're in a conflict or something. And then also don't go into avoidance where you just shrug it off and you don't tell the person your feelings. Go back to your I statements, your eye contact, your sort of body language. And then finally, respond rather than react. I always say it takes 2 to fight and to argue. So don't, when somebody's yelling, you don't have to yell back. You can respond to the person without reacting to his or her negative um, behavior that they're putting out there. And so if you go through these steps of the behavior modification and you relapse, just remember that's just part of growing. And then learn to be assertive. We don't want to be passive and we don't really want to be aggressive, but we want to stay right in that middle ground of assertiveness where you're not judging, you are who you are. And this concludes my show of behavior modification. I apologize for it being late. This had some computer glitches, but it appears they have been fixed. Thank you.